So the Canon C100 Mark II. I've had this camera for about 3.5 years now, and up until recently I've used this for the majority of my CK Productions projects and all my personal projects, weddings, basically any project that I had that was outside my main production company job. So this camera is a very unique camera in a lot of different ways. It's in the EOS C series, which is included with a lot of different other cameras that are a similar structure and similar form. But ultimately, as you pay more, you get more and more out of the cameras going up. So there's like the C200, there's the C300, C500, you know, Mark whatever at this point nowadays. I used a lot of the C100 Mark I when I was in college. And back then, you know, there weren't as many cameras out there that could shoot even 60 frames per second. Well, nowadays it's like 4K 60 is pretty much the standard now. But I know we've been talking a lot about my new camera, the Canon EOS R6, which we're actually filming with right now. You know, I think it's kind of funny when you film camera reviews, you never really film with the camera that you're actually reviewing, which is interesting. But over the years, obviously I have a lot of different images that I've shot with this, and I'm gonna be showing to you guys throughout the review of this video. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Brian. I host this filmmaking channel here where we do gear reviews, behind the scenes videos, VFX breakdowns, all that kind of fun stuff. I have a main channel called CK Productions that I co-founded, about 131 subscribers right now. We do a lot of comedic video game related short films on that channel. A lot of times I'll bring videos from that channel and bring them on here and do a lot of VFX breakdowns and behind the scenes of them here. If you're into any of that kind of stuff, be sure to smash that like button down below and subscribe for 2 videos a week. So the technical specifications for this camera, it's a Super 35 sensor. It's also a 4K sensor that it shoots with. But the unique thing about this camera is it actually doesn't output internally 4K, which is kind of a bummer in a way, kind of odd. If you're shooting with this camera, basically what happens, it ends up downsizing the picture into a 1080 output. That 1080 output, it can be an H.264 output or it can be an AVC HD output. The price tag of this camera nowadays is about $2,700. I bought this for about $3,200 around like the first year it came out. I think the initial asking price, you know, of it was more like at $3,500. But even if you want to get this used nowadays, you can probably get it for about $2,000 or so. So now it's interesting that you can think about the quirk about how this camera records to be a bit of a turnoff. It's actually served as kind of a big advantage for a lot of the work that I've done. Of course, it's kind of a bummer not to have the output in 4K, but a lot of the stuff that I've shot over the last few years haven't been 4K deliverables. They've been 1080 deliverables. If I shot it on here in 4K in the first place, I would have ended up having to downsize anyway. But you know, the advantage of that too is even though it's 1080 footage that you have, it still has the quality of 4K footage. In terms of the footage and the file size and everything, it has a very specific way of compressing files where the video files that you get out of the camera actually aren't as big as a lot of other cameras, but it's a very lossless compression where you really don't lose any of the detail out of it. So with that in mind, you know, shooting with a camera like this, I'm able to shoot a lot of different footage, a lot of footage throughout the entire day, even multiple days on one singular card, not having to, you know, switch out cards a lot when I'm on set. Especially for something like a wedding, there's not always a lot of time for you to have to go and switch out the memory card and switch it to something else. And then the fact that there's 2 card slots here is even better. And even though it has some of the quirks that I talked about, the footage that comes out of this thing is very great. It's incredible, honestly, and has a really nice C-log built right into it. If you want to shoot some stuff in the film log type of look, which is something I would definitely suggest with this camera, it gives you a lot more dynamic range when you're shooting it that way. And coloring the footage from this camera in post has really been enjoyed in so many different circumstances. In terms of frame rates, you have up to 60p in full HD, but again, nowadays, pretty much the standard is 4K. So it would have been nice to get something like 120 frames per second in HD or something like that. Another positive of this camera I like is the battery. Along with having a lot of storage, the battery lasts for a very, very long time. I would say with constant shooting, these batteries can last for about 3 to 4 hours. That's about the length of a normal CK shoot that we do, about 3 to 4 hours. And the fact that that battery can last the entire shoot without us having to worry about it at all, it's pretty great and it's pretty incredible. You know, we've had a lot of battery issues in the past with cameras eating up battery pretty quickly. I'm pretty sure I'm gonna have to change the battery on this camera at some point. And the fact that I can go on a wedding and not have to worry about the battery dying in a very important. And they don't even take that long to charge, honestly. So another thing about this camera, and the reason why I picked this over a lot of the competitors, it's got a lot of built-in features that a lot of other cameras don't really have. I really like the ergonomics of this camera. I like the shape of it. It's very nice to use this camera, especially in handheld situations over something like a DSLR or a little mirrorless camera. You have the side handle that can go on here, and so you can hold it up that way. You can hold it from the top here as well. It feels very sturdy and it feels very well put together. And then the built-in features that it has in it, it's something that not all like mirrorless or DSLR cameras really have in them, or if they do have, they're not as easy to get to. You have, you know, your magnification, your focus peaking, your zebras, built-in ND filters, all that kind of stuff. These are stuff that I use on every single shoot that I use this camera, and they're very easy to access, and they're very easy to just press a button and it works. And it helps a lot when framing up shots. It helps a lot when knowing shots are in focus. The focus peaking is something that I use constantly. ND filters is especially something that is absolutely huge with this camera that I've loved to use over the years. Shooting outside in a lot of bright scenarios, still want to get that cinematic footage that I want to get. I want to open up my apertures as far as I can in some situations, but if it's too bright outside, if the sun's too bright, I'm not going to be able to do that because I'm going to be overexposed. These are a game changer. Just flip right through them, and then you have either 2 stops, 4 stops, or 6 stops of ND filters right then and there. Honestly, this is like a big selling point of this camera. Anything that has built-in ND filters is just something that I really like. You typically only get that in cameras that are sort of these size. And a couple other things, the fact that it has a sound bar built into it. It also works as a handle, and you can get into here. You know, obviously this is the most high quality sound that you'd be using, but also the fact that they have this in here, you can hook in your XLR cables right into the camera right here. And if you're in a studio situation or some kind of situation where you don't have to record to something like a Zoom, you can just set up, you know, a microphone and just plug it right into the camera. That works out, you know, tremendously well. For that, you don't have to do any syncing in post. It goes straight in the camera, and you've got your different dials, and you have your controls right here that you can, even sticking like a nice microphone in here has worked a lot. You know, in the situations where I went around with Joe in one of the conventions or something like that. And last but not least, in terms of the structure of the camera, the eyepiece that they have here really works very well. That's something I didn't like about the old C100. The C100 Mark I had a really terrible eyepiece, but they've really upgraded the eyepiece that they have here. Like I keep saying, it's something I've used a lot over the years that I've had this, and it's worked out really well. Something also great to consider about this camera in terms of the recording of it, it has no maximum record time. So you can let this camera go and record for hours if you want to without it stopping. I know that's a quirk that you have in something like, you know, a mirrorless camera or DSLR. They'll stop recording after 30 minutes or so. I just thought of that now because this just stopped recording. But you can record for as long as you need with this camera, and the fact that its battery life is so long, you can record for hours with this thing without having any problem. A couple negatives to go along with it. This is, you know, a different type of camera than something like a mirrorless camera or DSLR. I love the picture that comes out of this thing, but I do really dislike the fact that it doesn't output, you know, in 4K. You know, that should be standard, especially for something that for this price. That's a problem Canon has had, especially with this kind of series here. With this series of cinema cameras, this and like the C200, you know, C300 and stuff like that, they're fantastic cameras that have a lot of great stuff built into them, but they have these little types of quirks, and that's why a lot of people tend to go a little bit more to the Sony side when it comes to, you know, shooting with cinema cameras, because Sony sometimes has a little bit more, you know, bang for your buck in a way. I've always kind of preferred to go the Canon route because I like the color science of the Canon cameras more. The C-Log that comes out of this, the color science of that has been really great, and it's really great for skin tones especially. When I'm working with it, I do notice there's a little bit of degrading when it comes to that compression that it has. You know, I said it was mostly lost as compression, but it's mostly lost as compression in the fact that, you know, it retains the colors very well and it retains the detail very well. But when I'm doing stuff in After Effects, if I'm doing kind of green screen or some very precise rotoscoping, sometimes doesn't have all of that detail when you zoom in there. Another thing to keep in mind when you're shooting each camera, it's a Super 35mm sensor. And, you know, Super 35mm sensor is really pretty standard for a lot of cameras like this. But if you're used to shooting on something like a DSLR or a mirrorless camera, those cameras often have full frame sensors. So when you're picking out your lenses and stuff, you're gonna have to think about the crop factor that has for it. You got an 85mm lens on here right now, but in actuality, that 85mm lens is more, you know, like over 100mm lenses on something like this. You're a little bit more zoomed in from the get-go. And last but not least, the size of the camera is something that it's not necessarily problematic. It's just something that you need to kind of get used to and you need to be aware of when you're shooting with a camera this size. One of pretty much the standard shooting styles nowadays is to put a camera on a gimbal or stabilizer and shoot the majority of stuff basically on there. And that's what we've been doing a lot for CK Productions. That's what I've been doing for weddings a lot. I've found a way to get this to be on something like, you know, Ronin S or a Ronin S equivalent or something like that. But technically those gimbals aren't supposed to handle cameras this size, and you have to take off the bar here if you're gonna do that. It hasn't been a perfect ride, I would say. You know, we've gotten a lot of great shots with this on the stabilizer there, but we've gotten a lot of shots where we've needed multiple takes because the camera would bump or it would lose its balance or something like that. You can't get like certain angles, like angling the gimbal down like that. You just kind of can't do that because of the size of this. And that's something that I kind of wish I had something smaller, and that's another reason why I ended up getting a mirrorless camera for situations like that. This is great for shooting like in a studio when you have it set up on a tripod. Even you can even set it up to an external monitor to export 4K. If you're shooting it out on a gimbal or something, you might have a little bit of a more difficult time with it. Overall thoughts with this camera. This camera worked for a lot of things that I did over the years, but to be honest, I could have probably gotten a camera that, one, was less expensive than this, and two, could have outputted probably higher quality footage than that came out of this. But if I would have gotten a camera like that, I would have had to think about some other things. I would have had to think about the battery life more. I would have had to think about getting more SD cards and bigger SD cards. I would have had to think about, do I need ND filters? Those are things I just never had to worry about. But on the flip side, I probably wouldn't have had that much more of a bad time or an issue if I had gotten something maybe like a Sony a7S II or something where I've had to change the battery out a little bit more, or had to change the SD card more, or get, you know, ND filters. But in the end, I would have been able to get more outputs of like 4K and even more frames per second as well. So you gotta think about what you're shooting with and what scenarios that you're shooting with and how you like to shoot. So that's basically it with this camera. It's an interesting camera that you have to really think about its quirks, and you gotta think about its advantages and see if it's good for you. Camera like this isn't always for everyone. I think a camera like this works well for someone that may have more of a film school education or has been on a lot of traditional sets with like a lot of crew members and stuff like that. And so I know I talked about this for a long time. Love talking about gear. I love talking about cameras. I love talking about, you know, types of filmmaking as well. Be sure to smash that like button down below for more videos coming out. I try to post twice a week when I can. If you have any more questions about this camera or other cameras or anything in general, be sure to comment those down below. And next video, I'll be doing a comparison video between this camera and the Canon EOS R6 together. With that, I'll see you guys next time. Bye, everyone.